Welcome to Diverse Perspectives. My name is Samira Ali. I am a Milton Town Councillor, and today I am here bringing to you a show called Diverse Perspectives. The reason we are doing this show is that, as you all know, Halton viewers, that Halton is home to a diverse population of wonderful residents who make Halton a great place to live, grow, and play. And what we have been noticing on our end in Milton, especially, that we are growing very, very fast and adding new residents to our wonderful town and region on a daily basis. And what happens is this also leads to a lot of discussion about equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is why today I have invited two wonderful guests to join me in an open discussion, a casual discussion about diversity in Halton, what equity looks like to us, and share some personal stories. My first guest is Lena Sharma Sait. And joining Lena is Mifra Abid. And I'm now going to take a bit of a minute to introduce both the wonderful ladies. Lena Sharma Sait is the founder of Mending the Chasm and is an experienced facilitator, coach, trainer, and speaker. She works with clients to build inclusive, equitable, accessible, and anti-racist cultures. With over 20 years of experience in various leadership roles in Canada and Asia, Lena has worked in nonprofit, consulting, education, philanthropy, and supplier diversity spaces. She has leveraged her entrepreneurial spirit, her ability to adapt, and her intuitive ability to create authentically inclusive organizations. She also is working with Halton Poverty Roundtable, Indigo Love of Reading Foundation, and as an instructor at Sheridan College. Thank you for joining us, Lena. And joining Lena and myself today is Mifra Abid. She is the coordinator of the Together Against Islamophobia with the Coalition of Muslim Women and host and producer of the most amazing podcast Across Her Table, which talks to Canadian women with immigrant roots. She is, in essence, a podcaster and an anti racism advocate. Welcome, ladies.
Hi, Samira.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Welcome, Lena. Welcome, Mifra. And so, thank you for joining us today. And before I move on, I have to give a solid shout out to our producer, Tina McEwen, who basically is the driving force behind this show. Tina and I had a real discussion months ago about diversity and inclusion in Halton. And that's where this whole process started. And today, here we are in the form of a show talking about this relevant, most important topic. Much thanks to Tina and all her hard work. So thank you, Tina. Now, going on and moving on to our topic of the day, which is equity and inclusion. And I'm going to leave it up to the wonderful ladies joining me today to share with me what equity in action looks like. How about you go ahead, Lena?
Equity in action to me, and thank you again. This is such a needed conversation in our community, and so really honored to be here on the first episode. To me, equity means space at the table. I love I'm inspired by Mifra's the title of your podcast, but this idea of creating space for others at the table, spaces for where decisions are made, where resources are shared, where even ideas are born for things, like making sure that there's space for everybody to contribute, to have to be heard, and to have a hand in creating, in accessing. You talked about my background. I come from spaces. I think about philanthropy, for example, and what equity looks like in that type of a space, working in the nonprofit sector. And there were spaces where decision makers who had no connection to the issues were putting themselves in positions where they were making decisions about what a community needs. And so to me, what really resonated and stayed is where the most powerful transformation happened was where the people who were the closest to the issues were given the space at the table, the resources, and the space to say, this is what we need. Not, there's what you think we need, but here's what we actually need. And, the long-term impact and the long-term success of things was that much better because there was that equity and that inclusion from the beginning of a project.
Thank you, Lena. That makes so much sense. And it is such a needed exercise that I think not just municipalities, because I am a counselor, so I speak from that angle, but all organizations really have to look inwards and see where we are lacking and do we even have authentic voices on the table, coming back to the topic of table. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lena. So what do you have to add, Mifra?
For me, equity means equity for everyone. A lot of people think that, oh, okay, as long as my group is represented, we are good. So I see this as a disturbing trend because, of course, there's a lot been said about how white policymakers and white recruiters, for example, have to bring in more diverse voices to the table. However, when I say equity for all, it also means that when people of color are in power, they have to be mindful too, that it's not just the group that I identify with that, I'm going to bring on the table. And I see a lot of people are very vocal when it comes to their own group, but it means that you have to be vocal for every group, not just with people who you identify with. And I think that's very, very crucial to my work, is that equity has to be for everyone. It has to be applied across the board for everyone.
I understand. And thank you for that explanation because, just using the word equity is not enough. There's so many cross sections and intersectionalities when it comes to equity that have to be looked at with, authentic eyes. And by authentic, I mean people who actually have faced inequity, who understand what it could look like, who can understand what microaggressions. And you know what? I feel sometimes microaggression is a misnomer because all kinds of aggression is major. It cannot be classified as minor because the effects are major. They leave you, feeling lesser than normal. And I feel like that's why microaggression is a misnomer. But agree with you, Mifra. Thank you for sharing that idea about equity. And which brings me to the next question, or so to speak, the idea of tokenization. Is that something that you ladies have faced in your life, in your work career, or just going about your day and just feeling, othered, so to speak?
Mifra,
Yeah.
do you want to go first, Mifra?
Well, I'll just say that I come from India where there's a lot of diversity and the idea of quotas is very popular. But personally, I'm not a very big fan of quota because I think people get the whole tokenism thing wrong. See, when somebody's, for example, recruiting, it's not that person's job primarily to maintain diversity. That person's job is to get the best candidate possible for the job. My question is not that bring everyone, you should be like all colorful board and all that. What I'm saying is that when your demographic within your workspace should reflect how the demographic is outside the workspace. Like, you're obviously going to have one group which is dominant, for example, within a space. But if you're excluding somebody, that's what you need to think about. And most often what happens is people want to bring one brown person or one woman or one person with a hijab and say, you know what, our job's done and like, we're good to go. So I have very strong feelings about that kind of, equity, as we call it. It doesn't really serve the real purpose. It's all for optics, I would say. And that's kind of disturbing for me.
Yeah, I agree. And so, Lena, would you have anything to add?
Oh, for sure. And I think two things I'd want to say is that, with everything that's happened in the last year, with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd's tragic murder, I've seen, as someone who is working in this space, I'm going to call it a knee-jerk reaction in terms of, it's great the level of awakening we've seen in our community. I'm truly humbled, and I think we were talking before, and it's asked me to, or invited me to tell myself a different story about the community I live in and the way that equity and inclusion is now being prioritized. But there was this knee-jerk reaction we want to bring in new people, and I was having leaders in the community reaching out to me and saying, we have a posting, can you help us get diverse leaders into these roles? And of course, I also think about this, you never want to start this work with diversity. That is a fact. If you do inclusion and equity well, diversity is the byproduct. But to start with diversity is how you create tokenization, right? Where the person, you're like, okay, we're trying to tick a box. Let's get this person, as you said, with a hijab, or a Black person, or someone with a disability, and you get them in, but you haven't created the conditions for success for them.
Yes.
And so you ask about tokenization, and I have been in experiences where I say that the system wasn't ready for me. They wanted someone like me. They saw what they wanted, but the moment I got in, I felt like there was this, they knew who I was, went through the interview process, and they know what I'm bringing to the table. And the moment I kind of get in, it's like there's that progressive ask to kind of turn your volume down, like don't shine so much, or don't, and then that to me is part of, and it's a lot more extreme in other cases. To me, that was a little bit of a light example, but I think when we, to start with diversity is, I never say diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm always like inclusion, equity, and diversity, because that is the order. To start with diversity is creating conditions for harm for people who really need to be at the table, but don't get that chance because the system or the culture is not ready.
One more thing I'd like to add is that a lot of organizations have these pictures in which they put the people of color in the front, like racialized props. And what I feel is that they're just getting social currency out of it. Like, okay, look, you know what? We've been the good guys. We've done all that is to be done. And so no more questions to be asked. That kind of attitude that, okay, this is a shut conversation now. So as Lena said, it has to be inclusivity first. Because people, they feel, oh yeah, I've gotten the job, and you know what, I've got so-called equal opportunities, but I still don't feel included. I still don't feel part of the team. I'm still an outsider. So, why is that happening? What is the point of getting someone if you're just going to make them feel marginalized even further?
Yes, there's this idea of the token only. And I read a statistic somewhere that says that you have to have at least 3 of any type to kind of eliminate that opportunity for tokenization.
And I kind of realized how difficult it might be because I remember that when we were creating the banner for CMW, which is Coalition of Muslim Women, and we were doing a hate reporting tool, we wanted to make sure everybody felt included in the banner. And we knew it, we spent hours because visually we can have only so many figures on the banner, but we were so conscious and intentional about it. But we realized that no matter with the best intention, sometimes it's not possible. But I think intentionality here is very, very important. What do you intend to do with this? There are always going to be some times when you slip through the cracks and don't get it right, but the intention has to be in the right place.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely. Those are great points. So I'm coming back to you, Lena, because I heard you say that, sometimes when you join an organization where you have been hired, so to speak, as just a token or a check mark, and then you start facing these walls that you cannot shine so much or be so real, so to speak, so don't be so yourself. Don't be so embracing of your difference is what I like to say, because I felt it too. So what can someone do in such a scenario where they face these walls? What can they do?
I get this question, from people in the community. Like, I'm invited in by clients, to do some work, and oftentimes, like, the client is not always somebody, it's usually someone who's white, dominant, often pale, male, stale, that those different. And so when I'm in this space and I'm working, and of course I'm working with diverse populations, and I have that question a lot, or, what do I do? These are my issues. And typically I just say there's three things, right? You either accept the culture for what it is and find ways to, because I want to also say, like, it's a privilege to be able to take the what I call the third option, which is to leave, right? Because sometimes it's like, there were times in my life where I had to keep the job because I have bills to pay. And, so I really want to be mindful when I answer a question like this, that you have to look at your context. It's very, it's a unique situation, but you can, typically that you either try to change it, right? And so if you take the path of trying to change it, that's about looking for allies in the system, right? Looking for people who have power, privilege, and platform, and can be, influential in terms of trying to create some change. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. The second thing, as I said, is to try and accept it. It depends on where you are in your journey. Like, I'm very conscious of how much fatigue people are having right now around Zoom fatigue, COVID fatigue. inaction fatigue around all the injustice that we're seeing. So there's a lot on the go if we're talking about this moment. And so sometimes it's about, I just need to take care of myself and try to just, keep myself strong, because leaving isn't an option. And of course, the last one is kind of making that call that, what, the work that it's going to involve for me to feel completely included here is not, not worth it. Like the culture change gap is so great that, you make that call for self-care, and there's so many statistics that have come out in this last year. And I've been happy to see the amount of research that's happening, because I feel like this was an invisible problem on some level. I mean, the lawyers of systems know about it because you sign NDAs, so it never becomes public, but like the system knows what they're spending on this problem, right? And people anecdotally, like there isn't a racialized person that I know who hasn't had some sort of experience. Now, whether they've ever brought that up at work or not, that's another, another situation. But for me, I have always spoken up. At cost to myself personally, I've stood up. And so it's not an easy thing to do, but there's that moment where you're like, I need to challenge. I'm not going to let this happen, because if I don't stand up, how many people behind me are coming next and they're going to experience the same thing? And so that's something that we have to ask ourselves, that, if you have the strength, the support, the resources, but it's always worthwhile to do that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree with you, because anybody who is working anywhere, is doing a job, is doing it because they need to pay the bills. And so there are situations where you have no option but to just deal with it, deal with the wall in your face, deal with all the no's, because I have been speaking to people on this issue ever since we decided to do this show, to get a bit of understanding what the real picture of diversity and inclusion is in Halton region. And the most common feedback I hear is that, like you said, don't shine too much. There is this hush hush culture within organizations, and I'm talking about all kinds of private, public organizations, where you are expected to fit into this role that is just so precisely cut. So yes, so my question was that, do you have anything to add, Mifra? Because what I have heard from folks is that in Halton specifically, because we are on Your TV Halton, I just was listening to folks who said that, they feel like there's a hush hush culture where you have to fit this role that has been just carved, centimeter by millimeter to the specification where you have to fit in. And there's no room for, any rough edges, so to speak.
Well, I would say that even if you don't want to fit in, you are kind of pushed into those holes, those cubby holes. Yeah. And sometimes when you say, you know what, I don't really care, this is who I am, and this is who I'm going to be, irrespective. And then they will have these awkward questions to kind of gaslight you into thinking, oh, I really want to be that person, like seriously, that kind of questions. And I've got some really, really weird questions, which are totally unrelated to the kind of conversation or work that we're discussing, but it's just basically, oh, because you're Muslim, can you comment on this? It's like, why do I need to comment on that? On some political issue that is like in the Middle East, like I don't speak for those people. Would I ask you to speak on, a protest in Ireland, for example? Like, how are you qualified to speak on that? So, and why should I expect you to speak on that on the behalf of someone that, something is happening halfway across the globe? So it's basically a tactic. Basically, I would think, as you said, microaggressions. Like, oh, no, we don't like the face that you're putting up. We need to do something about that. Yeah. So I think we just have to roll with the punches sometimes, and or sometimes just call out to people like, excuse me, can you explain why you're asking this of me? Make the person uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I've been in situations myself where I had really had to turn around and say, may I know why you're asking me this? Because I've had situations where people have made comments about my children and their skin color, and it has made me very offended, not only as a woman of color, but also as a mother. So I understand what you're saying, but it is a learning process, and I know that we are in that age. I'm not going to call it the golden age, but in that age or phase where I feel like we are able to talk about the topic of inclusion and diversity more casually, more prevalently, and more, especially in Halton, because just the way we are growing, I think it is a writing on the wall that there are more people here who are not uh, not the same. They are different, like myself and like you ladies here as well. And so it's interesting to start a discussion where we get to know each other. We talk about issues that matter to us, things that are okay, things that are concerning, and the gaps that need to be filled in understanding. And in my own experience, I have come across this idea of the old Halton and the new Halton, and those who are listening and watching will completely understand. And I can't see you, but I know there are lots of nodding heads. I can tell you that there is this communication gap more than anything else. As a counselor, I get to meet a lot of people from the old Halton, from the new Halton. I'm part of New Halton myself. And I can let you guys know that there's good intention on both sides. There's good direction on both sides. It's just a matter of who is going to reach out first. And so this is my kind of endeavor to reach out first, to introduce myself, and to give the opportunity to all of Halton to ask us the questions they've been wanting to ask for a long time but didn't know who to reach out to. Here we are. We're available to take your questions, any comments you have on issues related to diversity and inclusion. And coming back to Lena, I remember you just recently mentioning, finding allies. If you're facing walls within your organization or your community, finding those allies. And so my question is, what does performative allyship look like? So if someone has a friend who has just reached out and said, hey, you know what? I think you could be a great ally for me. I'm trying to bring about this change within my community or organization. What does that look like? What can one person do action wise to be that strong ally?
Yeah, and I think allyship to me is three things. It's active. It's well, I'd say four things. It's active, it's authentic, it's commitment, and it is a commitment to awareness. And so, that what that means is, when you talk about performative allyship, I think about last summer with the whole, the black squares in social media that were prevalent. And I remember when that was all happening, it was supposed to be a show of solidarity. For me, I remember it was feeling so problematic because I'm like, where are these people a year from, a year on? Are they still involved in the movement? Are they even involved? Was it just kind of like a feel good thing? And I mean, that's a quick example. But if you think about what allyship is, first and foremost, in terms of, it's not just about sitting, at your computer and sharing social media. And it's about stepping up and stepping in when it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, and possibly, I'm going to say, a level of risk to you, right? And I also say that, we as, like, I need to be an ally to myself first and foremost, right? And so when I talked about kind of the example of kind of, when you're in a work situation, we need to be allies to ourselves first, and to take care of ourselves in the ways that make sense, but to speak up for ourselves, to cultivate that, I call it a muscle. You got to build that muscle to speak for yourself, because you can't take people on a journey that you haven't been on yourself. And so if you can kind of take that risk, and then you start to kind of extend that to others, notice when you're seeing injustice, notice when you're seeing, it could be things like at the grocery store where you're waiting in line, but somehow the white person gets asked first to come ahead, or you're in line at the library. I had a scenario where someone wasn't ahead of me, but somehow they were asked to come up, and it's like, and so all little things, big things, but it's about it's an ongoing commitment as well, right? So the opposite is performative allyship, that only when it's convenient, when there's no risk to you, do you make a decision to do something. And I also kind of go a little further in that allyship is always in community with someone. There's a fantastic quote from Desmond Cole, author of The Skin We're In. He's an author, journalist, and I'm going to just paraphrase here, but basically he's saying that you don't get to call yourself ally. He was on an interview, a podcast interview with Pam Palmater, an Indigenous activist. And so he made this kind of comment that, you don't get to call yourself an ally. We get to decide that you're an ally. You don't get to do something, give yourself, a Boy Scout badge and a cookie and say, yep, I'm the ally. And so that has stayed with me as, it's something that you're doing in solidarity with the community. And I've had questions when I work with clients where people are saying, I'm really in an isolated community that's really mostly white. How do I show allyship? And and that's not an easy question, but I just said, how can you build community, or who can you connect with virtually? We're in being in a pandemic right now. All of us are homebound. We're not actively physically gathering. And so all that to say that, the difference between active and performative is, the level of commitment and risk that you're taking. And I don't mean to say put yourself in harm's way, but it's about standing up and recognizing that people like us don't have the option of saying, I'm not going to deal with it today. It's like, whether I want to or not, I'm, likely to be subject to something. And so to recognize that privilege and to use it.
Absolutely agree with you, Lena. Thank you so much for that such comprehensive answer, because I took so many points from your answer. Number one being that an allyship is not a badge that you can just put on yourself. It has to be earned, and it has to be followed with action. And one thing I would like to add to that list is it has to include consultation with the community. I cannot put on a black square on my shirt and say, hey, you know what? I am an ally for the Black BLM, right? Black Lives Matter. I have to consult with actual organizations who are doing the work to understand what can I do. And at the most bare minimum level, what folks can do is to at least listen and learn, and most importantly, unlearn. So I'm going to add that because I had some personal experiences, not just with the Black Lives Matter, not just with many other causes that make people passionate about diversity and inclusion, but also about the 2S LGBTQ community. Allyship is supporting diversity and inclusion is all encompassing. Coming back to what Mifra said, you cannot just pick and choose one cause because it affects you personally and say, oh, though, those people, I don't belong to those people. And I'm going to come back to the term those people in the end. But just coming back to you, Lena, and saying, if you have anything to add when it comes to performative allyship, what have you seen with your work against Islamophobia?
I mean, Mifra, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I meant Mifra.
Oh, first of all, I'm say with performative allyship is what happens when all the hashtags stop. It's basically what you're doing and nobody else is watching. And I read this quote that if you ever wondered what would you be doing during the Holocaust or during the civil rights movement, you're doing it right now.
Yeah.
So, people think it has to be like a huge cause. It has to be so glamorous and only then will I step up. No, it has to be small battles, as Lena said, everyday things that you need to step in. And I find it really disconcerting that people will very nicely give the Indigenous land acknowledgement at the beginning of every program, but when they see an active ethnic cleansing happening right before the eyes, they will just be silent on it. So, that screams performative allyship to me. Like, how can you pick and choose? Just because this is no longer an active issue, you think it's safe to, lend your allyship to this, but there is an active issue that's going on right before your eyes, but you're like, that's not the fire that I want to dance. I'd rather make a monument over the ashes of an old fire than actually put out, a fire that's happening right now. So I think that's the key to what performative allyship is like. If it costs you, and that is why you step back, then you're not really an ally.
Right.
So it's always like, okay, if I'm getting some social currency out of it, as Leah said, like, if it's that black square or the hashtag, which is getting more hits on your post, it's a social currency that's, working in your favor. Right. What happens when you are censored for a stand and you still take a stand? Mm-hmm. I think that's allyship. And again, yeah, you don't have to put yourself in harm's way necessarily, but sometimes I've noticed like people say things to me like, I'm Indian, but I'm apparently fair-skinned for Indian standards. And then people say, oh, but you're the good Indian. Look at that guy. And I'm like, at that point, I was like so shocked that somebody would say something like that in front of the dark-skinned person who was with me. I was completely tongue-tied. And to this day, I kick myself. Why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I say something? I was afraid that I would be exacerbating the situation. I would be making the other person feel more uncomfortable. But I think being uncomfortable is she's already made that person uncomfortable. So there was nothing that I said could have made it worse.
Yeah.
So in fact, my silence was actually making it worse. And I to this day, that haunts me. Like, why didn't I step up and be an ally at that time? So at that time, I felt I was being very performative. Like, I always say, okay, all skin colors matter. And not that because I agreed with the person who asked that question, but I just didn't know how to respond in that situation. And I feel I need to equip myself, be better prepared if such a situation comes before me. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to say something.
I love that. And I have to say two things. That was so amazing. I love that you named shadeism. That's a whole other conversation, right? But I thought of two things. Like, what I teach and we talk about allyship is that we're always allowed to speak from our position, because sometimes people say, well, it wasn't my place, or, because I also say that you want to ask the person, typically, because there's sometimes work scenarios. Let's say you're at a work meeting and, a microaggression happens from a boss or a director, and people are like, what do I say? And like, there's been instances where I'm like, I just want this to be over and I want to leave. Like, if I was the person who received it. And so I'm always a big believer of like, it's not always the best decision to take it on right head on, because sometimes you want to check in with the person who experienced it and say, hey, how can I have best supported you in that moment? Could I have said something? That's a conversation, because I always say you have to have a level of social capital with somebody too, right? But the other thing I say is that we can always speak from our position. You can always say, that didn't sit well with me. I felt really uncomfortable. So that way, if the person who experienced it is like, please don't make this continue, and I don't want the spotlight, because sometimes that is how we feel in a moment. If we're like, this is my 10th microaggression of the day, I cannot take this, I have to let this roll. But we can always say, that felt really uncomfortable for me. And so maybe you don't have the perfect words, and there have been times as well, where I'm like, oh, I couldn't think of what to say in that moment. Yeah. Even if it's for me personally, like I've had people say, your English is really good, how long have you been here? Or, whatever those kinds of things are. And it's like, I don't even know why I have to answer that question. Like, just because that might be my reality doesn't mean we have to answer that, because it's like, we're not asking people of dominant culture those types of invasive questions when we barely know them, right? And so I have probably gone on too much, but thank you for what you shared.
No, you have not gone on too much. That is what we are trying to achieve here, is to share personal stories, because when you share your personal stories, there are so many hundreds of people who will watch and who will resonate with your stories and will learn from your experiences and my experiences. And that's the whole idea that we started this show for. So thank you for sharing that personal account, Lena. And it's never easy to share personal experiences. Coming back to what Mifra said and what she faced, and she still feels bad for not speaking up. But you know what? It was a learning experience for you and for many of us who are watching you today. Talk about it, and that's how you grow. And you just said intentionality matters. It's the intention that matters, and you grow from it. So I just want to thank both of you ladies for joining me today and for sharing your personal experiences, for having this candid discussion about inclusion, diversity. And it is such a multifaceted topic. There are so many layers, so much to unpack. We were just talking about shadeism. We were just talking about microaggressions. We are talking about personal stories. And so I know a lot of people are watching us. And if you want to join us, I'm just going to throw a quick plug here. If you want to join us, if you have stories to share, you can reach me on Twitter. I am at Counselor Samira Ali. I'm easily Googleable, and you can Google me and find me and send me a quick direct message, and I will connect with you. I am very responsive that way. So, okay, coming back to our topic of diversity.
I just want to add something. Like, I just thought about it, that I'm taking a training to train others to become active bystanders.
Okay.
So one of the things that we actually have to deal with is that, what do you do when a snide remark is made, for example? Like, and what the example was given is that there could be a person who's a female who is, very good at her job, but someone at the conference says, she was a token female hire. And, and I'm sure that happens, and maybe not in so many words, but in, some other, in other forms. So how best would you, react in that way? And I could only think of one thing, is that ask the person to explain their joke, because most people, say it in a joke form and say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that joke meant. Can you explain it? And you'll find that most people who are biased, whether they're racist, sexist, Islamophobic, they don't want to explain their jokes. They don't want to explain their biases. They don't want to explain the dirty thing that's, implicit in what they have just, insinuated. So one way is like, without putting anybody in harm's way, is just play dumb and ask, I'm not sure, is that supposed to be funny? Like, I didn't get the joke. Could you explain it to me? Yeah. Nobody wants to explain their hate to anybody.
Yeah.
I loved that. And I think that is such a great position, especially for people who are, I'm going to say white, that's a good allyship position for you to take, because I think sometimes for those of us who are living the experience and having to also challenge it, sometimes there's moments where like, I don't have the will, but like when people ask me, what are those allyship moves? To me, that's classic. Like, you can always fall back on curiosity. Like, tell me more about that, right? If that's all you can muster, that is an interruption. And I think it causes, and it stops everybody. Like, oh yeah, what are you going to say to that? I love that.
Yeah, thank you.
I've had people say the worst things to me. I've had this person say to me, I can't get my kids into Catholic schools in Halton, but somehow, and he looks very pointed at me in the entire room, these Syrian refugees, they seem to get in anyway. I'm like, you didn't just say that.
Wow.
And I confronted him in the sense, okay, first of all, I said, I'm not Syrian. Second of all, I don't see how a Muslim would get into a Catholic elementary school. And third of all, and he doubled down on it. He said, oh yeah, but then, I can get my kids in a Khalsa school, and I can get kids into an Islamic school, and yet here we are. It's like, is this not even hearing himself?
Yeah.
So it's very easy to get triggered. I just want to say that I was very triggered at that point.
I don't blame you.
And I could hear my heart just, screaming and beating. And at that point I said, before I say something really, really that I will regret later, it's better to keep quiet for now. Not because I was afraid of him, not because I felt, that he has an upper hand in this, but at that point I was like, anything I say is going to be, I can't put it back then. It'd be like the genie out of the bottle, and then I'll be the bad guy.
Yeah, and I love that you named what was happening in your body in the moment, right? Because that's in the work that I do, I really teach people, we need to build our cultural and emotional resilience to be able to engage positively with difference. And people, because when you do anti-racism trainings, equity trainings, unconscious bias, whatever those are, people come to this work with their brains. They come with their heads. They're like, yeah, I want to like take in everything I can. But this work actually requires our hearts, our bodies, our spirits, because as you said, like when these things happen, where do we feel them first? It's our bodies. It's my face gets hot, my heart is racing, my hands are clenched, or whatever that is. And so when we talk about allyship and we talk about what the work is, like, part of that is like, of course, read the books you can. I have been hearing so many people, there's been no shortage of book clubs in the last 6 months here in Halton, which is amazing to see. I helped facilitate one for Halton Black Voices around one of my favorite books in this work. It's My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. But this idea of like, we need to, we have a hard time engaging with difference. And so rather than, this is kind of my conflict transformation background, but getting, comfortable with this idea of conflict. And sometimes it's internal conflict. It's like, do I want to face the fact that I have racist beliefs? And honestly, if you're growing up in the system that we're in, there's no way that we're not racist. And I say this, that we're all racist, including myself. Like coming from, the South Asian community, I grew up with a lot of anti-Black racism. My parents, immigrated here just before I was born. And I grew up with that and never really understood it. And so part of my work is to address that, to deal with the ways that recognizing my privilege, my fair skin privilege, my caste privilege, my, coming from my family is Hindu, and we're from the Brahmin caste. And growing up, I didn't think much of it. Because I didn't grow up in that culture where it was so active. But as an adult, I realized that I've benefited in many ways, even though I don't see it today. And so all that to say that we all have work to do. And coming back to Mifra's point around the opening, that it's not about just advancing my people. All my relations is an Indigenous idea. All my relations is every living thing, if we choose to kind of go that way. And I had a leader say that we have two hands for a reason. One is somebody holding, pulling us up, but the other hand is to pull another. It's a chain. We're pulling each other up. And so it's just something that I thought of in response to what you're saying.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for sharing those personal accounts, ladies. Time and again, I will have discussions with people. These are passionate topics for me. So I'm usually talking about these topics. And many times I will face a wall and someone will say, there is no racism in Halton. And let me tell you, folks who are watching, that is not true. There is racism in Halton. And, first recognizing my own privilege, I will recognize that. And I will say, yes, I recognize my privilege that, I am an elected official who was lucky enough to get elected with the majority vote, be on council for Milton. But having said that, there are challenges that people of color face in this region every single day. A personal example that I want to share is that when I was knocking on doors in 2018, there were many doors that were slammed in my face. And the only question that was asked was, are you Muslim? And I said, yes. And the door was slammed in my face. Many times I was told I would never vote for a Muslim, and the door was slammed in my face. So that is my personal account. And I've had similar discussions with, people of color who are on council who got elected in Oakville, in other regions, and I have heard similar stories. So let me just let people know for a fact that there is racism around us. And the reason why it is important for us to talk about it, to acknowledge it, and to work on it is because our kids are growing up in this region. And we want to leave behind a legacy of inclusion and equity where all of our kids, no matter what color they belong to, what race they belong to, what religion, what orientation they have, they are able to coexist in peace. Now more than ever, after this pandemic, hopefully it is after the pandemic soon, we need to find out ways of how we can work together to rebuild ourselves from where we came from, right? We came from a normal to this new normal. So we need to go back to that normal where we rebuild into a Canadian society that is, all inclusive and working together to make Canada, the wonderful place it is. It already is. So I just wanted to thank the ladies again. And this is one of those topics that we can just go on and on for hours, and it will not end. But I appreciate the personal inputs. I appreciate the learning points, especially from you, Lena and Mifra. If you have anything to add specifically with regards to Islamophobia, any education points for us, any learning points for us. I know that the organization you work for is doing wonderful work. So if you can share some links or resources with us that people can go check out and kind of find out ways on how they can be good, actionable allies.
Yeah, I would actually want to say that we've just launched a hate reporting documentation tool, basically, and it is limited to the Waterloo region for now, but we hope it's going to be replicated in other regions as well. Is basically anybody, literally anybody, can contact us if they've either experienced or witnessed an Islamophobic, xenophobic, or racist incident. And a lot of times these hate incidents don't meet the threshold of a crime. So it can be reported to the police and law enforcement can step in, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't cause enough harm. And Muslim women are like the most victimized people in Canada. Like Stats Canada has shown that, the hate incidents related to religion has actually increased for Muslims, and especially Muslim women. You talk about intersectionality, and the worst case is for Black Muslim women who wear the hijab. So it's like on three fronts, they become like victims on three fronts. So we've tried to really open it up for people, because people are so reluctant to talk about this, this incident. They're scared, they're ashamed, they don't know, they can't navigate the system. So what we're doing is trying to help them navigate the system, whether it comes to advocacy, whether it comes to one-on-one supports. So this is the kind of stuff I would like really to see replicated in other parts of, Ontario and Canada for that matter. And it is that the look, it ranges. There's a whole spectrum of hate that you experience as a visibly Muslim woman, from the look that you get to the questions you ask to downright ripping of the hijab. And we've seen that it's happened almost 7 or 8 times since December in Alberta for some reason.
Yes.
And almost all the victims have been Black Muslim women with hijabs. So, it's disconcerting, because when hate takes place in one region, it doesn't take long for it to reach our own shores. And if anything COVID has taught us is this, that you're only as vulnerable as everybody else is.
Yeah.
We can't think that, oh, this is my safe place and this is not going to be affected with what's happening in this part of the world. If COVID has shown us anything, is that we all are vulnerable. All our systems, are only as strong as we protect them, and only as strong as we intentionally make that effort to keep them upright. But it doesn't take much for them to fall apart. So, it is the experience of being visibly Muslim, or even not visibly Muslim, as in your experience. Just the fact that you are a Muslim can sometimes work very much against you. And we came from a place when we wanted to address Islamophobia. Let me be very straight. We said, okay, this is our experience. But we realized very soon that we can't talk about equity unless we're talking about equity for all. We can't talk about safety unless we're talking about safety for all. So we have not kept a barrier that, oh, you have to qualify as Muslim. And you know what? Most of the people who are calling us are Asian people who are facing anti-Asian hate post-COVID. And that's really sad in a sense, but in a way heartening that they trust us enough to know that we're not here just for ourselves. And I cannot, say that point enough. We can't just be looking after our own selves, our own people. And, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
You have to be, opening up, you have to be inclusive in your safety protocols as well.
Agreed.
And I love that you talked about the kind of the anti-hate approach. And in Halton, so I haven't heard of a structure kind of like that come to existence, but what I have heard is that in the last 6 months, there's been at least 4 different surveys. There's a hate crime survey that's actually out right now being circulated across the community. There is a Halton Equity and Diversity Roundtable is also doing kind of a belonging survey. The school board here, I'm a mother to 2 children who are in the Halton District School Board. There's a survey that went out that I had to complete it, and it's probably one of the most comprehensive things I've seen in a long time. And I'm also sitting at a table with Sheridan College, with Oakville Community Foundation, with the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton, and I think there's an Indigenous group as well. And we're basically about to launch a sense of belonging survey as well. I've done my best to connect them all, because I'm like, look, let's share this data, because it's going to be an amazing piece of research. So I know that's happening, and it's promising for me to see that. If I could share, I launched a project that I developed. I launched it this year. It was called the Inside Out Project. Our Future is Anti-Racist. And what happened was last summer, with everything that was going on, I was seeing an unprecedented, and I know we're kind of sick of that word in this pandemic, but when I launched my business in 2019, I actually didn't expect to do a lot of work locally because of my own experience. I just thought there wasn't that readiness here. And last summer, there was just this, awakening of, leaders reaching out for work. And so, but what I was recognizing was that there wasn't budget because of COVID. Budgets had been decimated. And so it was kind of literally keeping me up at night. Like one night in August, I was kind of woken up at 1 a.m. with there's an idea I need to write down. And that idea ended up becoming the Inside Out Project. And because my fear was, if we waited until budgets bounce back, that the will wouldn't be there in the same way. And so I partnered with a local charity called Community Conflict Resolution Services of Halton, and we applied for funding from United Way, the Emergency Community Support Fund. And we were able to get subsidies or get some funding where we can offer subsidies to organizations to participate in this program that I developed. And basically 15 organizations and 80 leaders went through this program, and kind of the design was really intentional. I asked that every organization who applies has to send 5 people, and it has to be a cross-functional, cross-hierarchical team. They had to commit to all of the sessions. They had to commit to meeting between the sessions. Like, it was quite rigorous in some ways. And so, you know, I just actually got the report. I was partnered with McMaster to evaluate the program and get the feedback. And so it's just been an interesting to see, you know, kind of what's shifting and what's changing. And of course, it's early days. Like, as I say, it is like turning the Titanic, this culture change work. It's not about a quick fix. Because I had also people reaching out to me who were like, oh, can we like get everything sorted by the end of the year? Like, you're calling me in August, you think you're going to solve a multi-century problem in 4
Right.
months? I don't think so. But I get that. Like, you know, it's like you really have to meet people where they are. And that, I mean, that especially in a community like Halton, where I think there is still invisibility for people. If you only kind of frequent a certain part of the community, you're not seeing the diversity. I mean, Milton, I appreciate, is a lot more diverse, and I love being in Milton and seeing kind of the things I get to access that in Burlington, where I live, I don't get to see it in the same way. But just it is a place of compassion. And there are some days where I'm triggered as a practitioner. Like, I have people reaching out to me and being racist to me, not knowing it, but they're being racist in their engagement. And I don't say I went out expecting that, but I've come to, you know, I actually ground myself. You can see a light behind me. It's my diffuser. I have practices that I use to keep me kind of grounded, so that no matter what I hear or see, I can still remember to stay in my body and not get triggered and then not be able to participate. So just to say that I'm really humbled by the interest and the authentic interest and the awakening, but also still seeing that there is still way more silence than I'm comfortable with as well.
Yeah, I understand that, Lena. And you know, just I heard Mifra just say that silence is actually taking a side. So
It
it's,
is.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's time that, you know, if you see something, say something and speak up, and be there when you're required to speak up, recognizing your own privilege. And I say that for myself as well. And so it is a journey. You know, what I'm understanding after all of this talk that we had today is that it's a journey and it's going to take time, but we need to start. And if we have started, we need to keep going and carry on the work, because the work is much needed, because there are gaps, there are bridges that need to be built, and they can only be built through discussions, through talking to each other, through learning from each other, through listening, and from kindness. It is sometimes, you know, sometimes I feel like we need to say it's okay to be kind, you know, it's okay. Because you know, the pandemic has shown us that, you know, it is like Mifra said, it is just one thing that can just trigger a huge change in the community, in the society. So when it happens, it affects all of us equally, no matter who we are. The pandemic did not ask us what our race was, or you know, who we are, or where we came from, or you know, what color are your kids. So the pandemic affected all of us equally. The effects affect us all equally. And so I am getting the 5-minute sign from our producer, which means that I have to wrap it up. And I'm going to thank Lena and Mifra for joining us, for sharing their nuggets of wisdom with us. And I would like to give the opportunity to you ladies now to, if you have any closing statements, remarks, or advice for our viewers tonight. Mifra.
I just say Milton feels like a hometown to me, and it'll always be, because that is the town that I landed when I came to Canada, and it's a great place to be. And I there are a lot of fond memories I have of it, and it's so, I love to see how diverse it is, and I hope to God that it stays that way. That, you know, it's a small community, very close knit, and you know, is something which is worth preserving, worth protecting, worth, you know, working for.
Absolutely. Well said, Mifra. And do you have any words to add, Lena?
Well, you talked about, you know, the pandemic and how, you know, we've all been affected. And I also think about Mifra's comment that, like, you know, we're only as strong as our weakest, you know, vulnerability. And then if you think about the pandemic and the people who were disproportionately affected, which really does ladder up to the inequities that existed before the pandemic, and it's really highlighted I love seeing, the fight that's happening around sick days and, a better wage. And, those were conversations I was a part of in my social justice advocacy days. And so really, and even basic income, something like that, our province piloted it. And imagine it was still here, how we might be in a better situation right now. So those are just, I'll get off my soapbox there. But I think when we talk about the pandemic and the recovery, the recovery has to be inclusive. We cannot afford to leave people out of this recovery. And so I think about there's a book called The Power of Onlyness by Nilofer Merchant. And it talks about this idea that, innovation there, some people feel that innovation is tapped, but I think when more than half the population hasn't gotten a fair shake at any decision-making tables, design tables, I really resist that. And so I think as you consider what your business can do, what the government decisions and enabling forces the government can help create, I think we have to think about inclusion, equity, and diversity.
Thank you so much, Lena. Those are wonderful points that I hope will help our viewers and listeners tonight. Thank you for joining me, ladies. And I just want to say to all the viewers, thank you for joining us, listening to us. If you have any questions, you can message me on Twitter, Counselor Samira Ali. And I just want to say that this is a journey. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And as a leader, I can let you know that the responsibility lies with leadership as well, in being careful in what words we choose and to make sure that we are a catalyst of positive reaction. And one last action point, if I were to leave with the viewers watching tonight or today, is that stop saying those people. Those people is actually you othering the people who live in your community, whose kids go to your kids' school and are very much part of the tapestry of the community you live in. So stop saying those people. And thank you for watching me and my wonderful guest tonight. Thank you for joining us. And remember, there is strength in diversity. Thank you.